I'm Shoshana Bryant, is that better?
That's well better.
I'm the Senior Director of the Jewish Policy Center, and I'm technologically challenged, as you can tell, by the fact that the microphone wasn't on. I want to welcome you to our program today on Understanding Russia. The Jewish Policy Center was founded in 1985 to provide a conservative Jewish forum on subjects both foreign and domestic. We are institutionally pro-Israel, pro-American defense, and the defense of our allies. Domestically, we support lower taxes, smaller government, free speech, and intellectual diversity. Our programs include publications. You have a copy in front of you of In Focus, our quarterly magazine. We also have online publications. We have insight articles, an in-context blog, and news feeds called Alliance Tracker and Frontline Defense. All of those online publications are available free of charge, and you can sign up for them as you leave today. We'll have a sign-up sheet. The Jewish Policy Center works have been published widely in the Asian Times, in American Thinker, the Daily Caller, Defense News, and I just discovered that we have been published in Chinese, Polish, and Czech. So I think our reach is beginning to spread. Our goal, first of all, is to advance our views, and we're not shy about what our views are. But secondly, we've noticed another interesting effect, and that is to say that there is intellectual diversity inside the Jewish community. People tend to think of the American Jewish community as monolithic, and we have presented ourselves to say that there is more than one way to address a problem. So today we are approaching the problem, or the conundrum, of Russia, and I think you're going to find our expert panel to provide you with a lot of information. They are in the magazine. You can read them in the magazine, but I think today we're going to go beyond the magazine. So I'm looking forward, very much looking forward, to an interesting discussion. Housekeeping, please turn off your cell phones. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's program, John Kislak from Miami.
Thank you, Shoshana. With China, with North Korea, with hotspots in the Middle East, Russia sort of gets pushed to the back page. But it's still a very serious player with very serious capabilities. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to allow each of our speakers to talk for a few minutes, then have a conversation, which, gentlemen, I hope will be interactive, not just one answer from one. I hope there might even be some disagreement, although I'm not sure we'll find that today. And then long before we end at 1:30, we will open for questions from the audience. Today we first we'll hear from Paul Joyal, who's the man. I'm reading, by the way, so I'm going to go very quickly. You have this, and I'm on page 2. Paul Joyal is the Managing Director of Law Enforcement and Public Safety Practice at the NSI. Anders Åslund is a PhD, a Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, and served as Economic Advisor to the Russian government in the 1990s. And Steve Blank is a PhD, is a Senior Fellow of the American Foreign Policy Council, and is a former MacArthur Fellow at the U.S. Army War College. They have articles in here. I hope you have read them or you will read them. I do not think that what you're going to hear today, by and large, is a repeat of what is in the article. So those who are teachers are going to assume that you have done your homework. Paul. Yeah.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for all of you for coming today. So I'm going to take on the issue related to Russian organized crime and cyber criminal activity. One of the challenges in understanding the Russian criminal hacking groups and their activities, both in and outside of Russia, is how Moscow employs them. What makes this type of organized crime unique? It's how it's instrumentalized by the Russian security apparatus. Our speakers today will explain how the Russian criminal state provides the roof and the mother's milk for their success. These groups thrive today. As one retired Russian criminal stated in 2016, if you believe he's retired, a very interesting formation. We have the best of both worlds. From Russia, we have strength and safety, and in Europe, we have wealth and comfort. So what roles do Russian-based organized crime perform for the Kremlin? First of all, probably even most importantly, they are a source of black cash. This black cash can be used for corruption, for influence operations. They launch cyber attacks. They can wield political influence. They traffic in people, goods, and they even carry out assassinations on behalf of the Kremlin. Russian-based OC is a serious and growing challenge as the evidence continues to build of the connections between Russian-based organized criminal networks and the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the Russian Military Intelligence Service, and the Russian Federal Security Service. So I'm going to start with a couple case studies, and I'm going to show how these state actions, we can identify certain criminals that participated in cyber attacks. The first one will be in Estonia. It demonstrated in 2017 that Russian organized criminals are an active part of active measures directed by the Kremlin. In Estonia, it started with civil unrest, and then it moved into the cyber attack. In 2008, the Russo-Georgian War started with cyber attacks, and then moved into the military phase. These all bring implicit psychological impact on the populations, and Russian criminal hackers played a prominent role in these cyber attacks. In 2006, Estonia experienced its debilitating effects from a botnet DDoS cyber attack on its banking and governmental networks. Estonia suffered 10 days without internet services, causing major disruptions in their financial system. Estonia was paralyzed electronically. This attack was orchestrated by the Kremlin, but it was executed by criminal cyber organizations and individuals. Criminal hacking organizations must be viewed as a Russian cyber army in reserve. They can be used to execute attacks, while Russia can deny that they are active involvement. In Georgia, it is important to stress that the beginning of the Russian invasion in Georgia occurred over the internet by a criminal organization associated with the Kremlin from St. Petersburg. The cyber attacks against Georgia first originated from an IP space in TNet, or Turkish Telecom, and this was well known as a spam generator of the Russian Business Network, RBN. The techniques observed, the botnet methodology, and the tools had previously been associated with RBN. Further evidence in their role was confirmed when the individual directly responsible for carrying out the cyber first strike on Georgia was identified as a senior RBN operative named Alexander Boykov of St. Petersburg. Another attacker identified was a prominent programmer and spammer, Andrew Smirnov, also of St. Petersburg. These men represented part of the leadership of the Russian Business Network. They were certainly not mere script kiddies or hacktivists, but senior operatives with a vast cyber hacking knowledge in positions of responsibility within RBN. And this is a common deniability argument of the Russian government when it says it was not the Russian government. RBN's fingerprints were also found in a 2007 Estonian cyber attack. RBN's real money comes from its criminal enterprise. It began offering bulletproof web hosting for $600 a month many years back, and quickly became the largest hosting site for child pornography in the world. They graduated into spam, online casinos, and phishing scams to steal bank passwords and credit card numbers. Variations in fact, RBN has been linked with the first Zeus Malware targeting bank accounts. Variations of the Zeus malware have now morphed into the dreaded black energy, which has targeted Ukrainian electrical power grids, as well as power grids in the United States and elsewhere. Zeus was first identified in 2007 as a distributed denial of service program, and it has constantly morphed and evolved by adding new functionality to the malware toolkit. These new functions avoid almost any simple or known detection technique from a variety of defensive mechanisms. These features, these feature additions make the malware more robust and show adversaries how they can use it. And now Black Energy has been morphed into attacking SCADA systems. This repurposed malware is now being deployed widely. In a further twist to the Russian criminal hacker capability set used by the Russian government, it was how they used American identities and American software tools, which were hijacked in the attack against Georgian government websites in 2008. In fact, they changed common Microsoft code and turned it into a cyber weapon. They used Twitter and Facebook to coordinate attacks on Georgian sites. Additionally, identification and credit card information stolen from Americans were used to register 9 of these attack sites against the Georgian government. A significant amount. So in Georgia, the attackers did not conduct any preliminary surveying or mapping of sites, but instead immediately employed specifically designed software to attack them. This indicates Russian government planning years before the August 2008 attack. For example, the graphic art used to deface one Georgian website was created with metadata created in March 2006, almost 2 years before the attack, but obviously saved for use until the campaign in August 2008. In the Ukraine, this is the place where you can do your worst without fear of retaliation or prosecution. We're better to train an army of Kremlin hackers in digital combat than in the no-holds-barred environment and atmosphere of a hot war inside the Kremlin's sphere of influence. Criminal groups play an active role in cyber war. The head of the Ukrainian Information Security Department of the SBU pointed out that separating official Russian crimes from the mass of criminal cyber crimes is no easy matter. Russian special forces or special services often use the territories of third countries to do everything they can to mask their involvement. So it has been reported even that a hacker from the Ukraine is cooperating now with the FBI when this hacker discovered his criminal malware was used by Russia to hack the DNC servers during the last presidential campaign.
Could you repeat that?
You can ask me a question after. In truth, Russian cyber attacks on the DNC is the only visible tip of the iceberg of Russia's massive campaign targeting American institutions, which dates back to 2014. So, with that, I would like to point out that the Russian use of assassination to destabilize is often part of the methodology that includes cyber hacking. Ukraine now regularly experiences assassination and terrorist actions as the conflict continues in eastern Ukraine. These are regularly carried out by members of Russian and organized crime groups or assassins for hire. One of the highest profile murders, Russian state member Denis Voronikov, who was expected to become an important witness in the treason trial against Russian-backed ex-president of the Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovich, was shot dead in the center of Kiev on March 23, 2017. The prosecutor general pointed out that those who ordered the assassination were located in Russia, and that the man who conducted it, who was killed, also had links with criminality and live contacts with the Russian special services. In 2017, a car bomb shredded a black Mercedes being driven by the senior intelligence leader, Colonel Maxim Shapoval, chief of the Ukrainian Military Special Operations Forces intelligence unit in the heart of downtown Kiev. This was merely the prelude to a large event, a massive, well-disciplined cyber assault aimed to bring the Ukrainian state and society to a halt. A wide range of institutions, including vast swaths of the private sector, were targeted by cyber attack, ransomware, and malware. There's a lot more details I can go into that. Our time is short. I'll conclude here, and we'll look forward to furthering our discussion during questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the nice publication, Susanna. What I would like to talk to you about, it is how should we understand Putin and his regime. And I think that the situation today, after 18 years, is abundantly clear, so that we can understand. Putin, in the beginning, was everything to everybody. During the period 2000 to 2003, he consolidated power. Economically, this was the best period, I would say, in Russia's post-communist time. But human rights activists were not very happy about it, since it was taking control over the political apparatus and over the judiciary apparatus, as well as the television channels. The second period, 2004-2008, showed quite a different Putin. Now it was state capitalism. That was the main slogan. The setting up of a small number of very large state holding companies with hundreds of companies within them. And this had nothing to do with economics. The starting point of this was the confiscation of a Yukos oil company and the arrest and jailing of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. If you want to take down the big businessman, you take the biggest, you take one. So this was quite cleverly done by Putin. And during the 10 years, 99 to 2008, Russia had an average growth of 7% a year. So what happens in such a situation? You get hubris. You know that you can walk on water, and then you just continue in the same fashion. After that, Russia essentially has had no economic growth. It has been, on average, stagnant. What happened in Putin's actual, that informal third term, 2008 to 2012, was that Putin showed his real face. It was no longer state capitalism, it was crony capitalism. A handful of his closest friends from St. Petersburg popped up, and they started tapping the state companies on a massive scale. No company has had so large assets stolen from it from above as Gazprom, Russia's gas giant. The assessment of later murdered Boris Nemtsov and his colleague Vladimir Milov was that in the years 2004 to 2007, Putin and his friends tapped Gazprom on $60 billion. So this is one of the most massive larceny that we have seen in the world. And this has continued. What Russians call the fourth real Putin period from 2012 is manual management. Putin does what he wants. And this is, of course, no way to run a government. And what is then the essence of Putin's regime? I will summarize it in 4 elements. The first is control of a state apparatus, of a judiciary, and of course FSB, the security police. The second is control over big state corporations in banking and energy and transportation. Putin does this by appointing his top friends to run these companies. Competence doesn't matter. Loyalty is everything. It's not true that they're all KGB people. They're simply Putin's people. Putin wants people whom he has known for a long time and that he can trust. Nothing very strange in that. The remarkable thing, though, is that competence is of so little interest. And you can take as an example, Gazprom had at its height in May 2008 market value of $369 billion. Today, Gazprom has a market value of $55 billion. So nobody has destroyed as much capital as Alexei Miller. And you can guess, he still remains in his post. And nobody thinks that he is likely to leave. If he would leave, it would be because of bad health, not because of bad economics. Because this is a man who has delivered the money to the people who matter. He has built a grand palace for himself called Millerhof, in the same style as Peterhof outside St. Petersburg. So this is the second part, the state cooperation. The third is the cronies. The brothers Rotenberg, Gennady Timchenko, Yuri Kovalchuk, and Nikolai Shamalov. Nikolai Shamalov is such a good man that Putin has given his daughter to one of his sons. And in a good friendship, Timchenko has given Kirill Shamalov, the lucky son-in-law, shares worth $2.7 billion. Friends help friends. This is how the Putin system functions. And you can also say that when I worked as an economic advisor to the Gaidar government in the early 90s in Russia, then I had a feeling that Russian corruption looked like this. There was little at the top and there was a lot at the bottom. Then it gradually moved like this. So there was little at the bottom and a lot at the top. And now it looks like this, more like a mushroom, with massive corruption at the top and little lower down. Russian state administration actually functions quite well because it is the big people who steal the money and they are then developing a new aristocracy. So the big people, they are letting their sons, only the sons, not the daughters, becoming vice presidents of the big state companies at the meager age of 25 to 30, with no particular education. They had better stay at home and get a mediocre education at the Russian university if they want to get a big post in Putin's Russia. And then the fourth element that might come as a surprise to you is the Anglo-American offshore. Putin and his friends take abroad at least $10 to $15 billion a year. If you take this for Russia as a whole, it's $30 to $45 billion that leave the country each year. This is official statistics, the second number, the first is my assessment. And this has been going on at least since 2006, when Russia introduced full convertibility. If you want to take out money from the country, you want to have convertibility. So Russia is protectionist when it comes to trade policy, but it's very liberal when it comes to the capital account. And this money, why does it go out? Because since Putin controls the judiciary, Russia does not have real property rights. So even if you are Putin, you need to take the money out in order to safeguard it. Where is it safe? In countries with Anglo-American common law. You need good rule of law where you keep your money. And that is not in Russia, nor in any neighboring countries. So the money goes out through Cyprus because of a double taxation agreement. then on, usually to British Virgin Islands, then to Cayman Island, and then there are two favorite addresses, the UK through many different ways, or the US through Wilmington, Delaware. So these are the main lines. So summing up then, what kind of regime does this amount to, and how does it react? As Paul said quite clearly, this is an organized crime regime. It's very little difference between FSB and organized crime and the Putin hierarchy. They operate together. In some cases it's better to have a state. Sometimes it's better to have secret police. And sometimes you really prefer to have organized crime. If you're going to do cyber attacks, for example, organized crime is better. Gives you a certain deniability. They are more flexible. And the second point is that this is a fragile and petrified system. It cannot reform. And the growth rate now is 1.5% a year. If anything, it can get better. I'm not talking about macroeconomic stability, because that's not the problem. Russia is extremely conservative on all macroeconomic measures. Little public debt, big international reserves, minor budget deficit, nothing to worry about, 2.5% inflation now. It looks close to perfect in the eyes of the International Monetary Fund. And then the third point then is what you do if you are the 12th biggest economy in the world and you only look upon China and the United States as your peers. And you're not really up there. Russia is number 3 in the world only when it comes to the military. What do you do in such a situation? Well, one idea is to use the military. Paul touched a bit upon it, I guess that Steve will do more so. But you can't really fight big wars when you have such a weak economy. So you can go for small victorious wars in your neighborhood. Crimea was ideal. Georgia in 2008 was also good, but there are few such targets. And you can't really attack NATO. I'm not very afraid of Russia attacking the Baltic states, because as my late friend Boris Nemtsov used to say, Putin respects Article 5 in the NATO statutes. So what do? You generally play a spoiler, as Russia is now doing in the Middle East, and wherever it gets the opportunity, Venezuela, for example. So this, we should not expect Russia to be constructive, because it's not in Russia's interest. The Russian propaganda now is extremely anti-Western, both anti-European and anti-American. And the idea is to present the West as a stagnant failure, and not as something that is good in any regard. So don't negotiate too much with Russia when there is something that you need to do in order to avoid an imminent risk or danger, yes, but not expect that there can be any kind of grand bargain, as some people also happy to suggest. So what is the best Western response? And this is the point I want to leave you with. Go after the money. Putin and his friends have massive amounts of money abroad. My assessment would be that Putin has $50 to $200 billion personally abroad. The reason for the big interval is that we don't know what he keeps in his own name and what is kept in the names of his cronies. We can't know how that has been shared. And how can we go after the money? Relatively easy. There are two things that are needed. Prohibit anonymous bank transfers, financial transfers. Bank transfers are properly policed. You don't get the dirty money through the US banks or any other Western bank really today. So how do you do? Two big ways. You put it into real estate. Real estate is intentionally avoided temporarily in the what is it called, the 2001 Act.
The Patriot Act.
The Patriot Act, sorry. So the Patriot Act for half a year prohibited money transfers into real estate. And then the real estate lobby managed to get an exemption. So this should simply be restored. The other way is, sorry to say it in a law firm, is the attorney-client privilege, through which a lot of money is taken. So tens of billions of dollars go through law firms each year into the United States. We don't know much about these money laundering flows into the US, but the US Treasury last they pronounced themselves upon it was that it's $300 billion a year that is laundered into the United States. It was in 2015, 20 years earlier, the US Treasury said $250 billion a year. So say that $6 trillion or so have been laundered into the United States in the last 20 years. So the big possibility lies here. And then the other part of it is anonymous companies. So demand always to know the beneficiary owners. On top of this, I'm all in favor of naming Putin's friends. Because when his friends were sanctioned in March 2014, Putin complained repeatedly in public how awful it was that his friends were sanctioned. While he said that the sanctions generally were good for Russia, but to sanction his friends was not good. So I think that we should sanction his friends and not sanction Russia as such when it comes to trade. But we should open up the finances to transparency, and my view then is that Putin's Russia will turn out to be much more fragile than in what it really is. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders and Paul. Thank you, Shoshana and John, for inviting me. Shoshana asked me to talk about what the West can do and what the elements of Western strategy are. So based on my colleagues' speeches, you understand that the first order of business in this profession is to understand the way the Russians think and act, and to understand them in terms of their own framework, not to project our own thinking and values onto the Russians and assume that they share those frameworks. So what you have to understand is that, as the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Ivanov said in January 2005 to the Russian military, Russia's at war with the West. It's not a kinetic war, there's no shooting going on, but they're at war with us. And what you just heard are examples of how that war is being waged. Cyber information warfare, and Russians don't make a distinction in their theory about that. Financial corruption, subversion, organized crime, plus military buildups, threats, blackmail, and all kinds of other attempts to take over key positions in Western economies like media, energy, commanding sectors, to use Lenin's term, of economies. What can we do about this? First thing we have to understand is that we are at war. And it's not just us, it's our allies in Europe. Because all the things that you've heard here are taking place in Europe as well. To wage war successfully, we have to utilize what the military calls the dime, all the instruments of power, diplomacy, information, military, and economics. That means not only we, but Europe, have to create stronger, more vibrant economies that are resilient, because the failures of economies, for example, after the crash of 2008, has allowed Russia to gain a lot of footholds in discredited liberalism, with a capital L, across many sectors of the world. Now that the American and European economies are growing, we have to find foundations, both here and in those countries, that will establish the greater resilience and capability of these states to go forward, to grow, and to meet their own domestic challenges. In Europe and America also, that includes migration, because Migration's coming, whether you like it or not. That's a fact of life. That has to be met. But that's besides Russia. But beyond that, not just growing economies and strengthening them, there has to be a coherent government strategy, both here and abroad, that utilizes all these instruments of power. For example, there is no information warfare strategy in the United States against Russia. Now, we know as a fact that the Russians intervened in last year's election on a bipartisan basis. This is indisputable. 39 states, not 21, 39 were attacked at their election commissions. We also know about the meetings between Russian operatives and the Trump campaign, Russian hacking into the Democratic National Committee, a whole series of other things are going to probably come out. The scope of this is breathtaking. But it's not, again, confined to the United States. We now see that the Russians were involved in Brexit, French presidential election, German presidential election, Dutch referendum and Dutch elections of the last 2 years. There's talk that they may be involved in the Mexican election next year, and they will also certainly be involved in our congressional election next year unless something is done to arrest this kind of phenomenon. But we have to raise the cost for that. So the need for a comprehensive government strategy on information warfare that tells the truth, exposes Putin and his friends, goes after the money, maybe exposes their holdings, if we can do that, and actually gets the truth out to not only to the Russian-speaking communities around the world and in Russia, but to Western elements who don't believe what they're hearing from people like ourselves about the fact that Russia is at war with us. Beyond that, the Russian military buildup is continuing. Putin just signed off on a $320 billion buildup for the next 7 years, despite the stagnant economy. If we have a colleague named Paul Goebel who writes every day about the Russian, what's going on in the Russian press. You can get this on the mail, or just write in an email and ask to be subscribed. What you read are depictions of suffering and stagnation that go back maybe 60, 80 years in Russian history. The safety net is collapsing. The country has fewer paved miles of roads than the state of Virginia. Think about that. 11 time zones and fewer roads than Virginia. And this is a military superpower. The money is going to either abroad or to palaces and, on Riviera or wherever, or on Costa del Sol, and or to the military. So, of course, the roads and human capital and all that stuff. We need to expose all that, but we also need to counter the military buildup. Now, that military buildup is both nuclear and conventional. We need to rebuild our conventional capabilities. If you read enough magazines in this town, you'll hear people complaining that our military is not capable of fighting the threat in Europe. Maybe not in Asia either, for that matter, or certainly if both go on at the same time. There needs to be a conventional military buildup, and there needs to be a nuclear military modernization. We can discuss the size and scope of those individual modernizations, but the fact is that needs to be there. That means we have to break the deadlock over budgets, put our finances on a sound basis, and produce not just a growth strategy for the U.S. economy, but a growth strategy for defense to meet the multiple threats beyond Russia. And in Europe, we have to demand, and I use that word advisedly, that allies not only spend 2% of their GDP, which is the NATO benchmark, on defense, but that they spend it on credible military capabilities. I could write you a defense program that would spend 2% of the GDP on defense, and it would all go to old age pensions to veterans. And I qualified, I hit the mark, but it doesn't get you any military capability. The test is not a percentage of your budget, the test is credible military capability, mainly conventional military capability, that can be used where necessary in Europe, first of all, to deter Russian adventurism. Beyond that, militarily, the decision to whether or not to go ahead and supply Ukraine with weapons, again, defensive weapons, counter-mortars, counter-bar artillery, electronic weapon capabilities to stop the Russians, is on President Trump's desk. He needs to sign it. I mean, I've written about this in public. I know a lot of people disagree with this. Nothing will bring home to the Russians our determination to stop their criminal aggression faster than the idea that we can match them in Ukraine and give Ukraine the weapons it needs. Now, Ukraine, unfortunately, has to live up to its side of the bargain, and there's a lot of resistance in Ukraine, as you may have seen in the headlines, to doing so. That is cleaning up its act, getting rid of corruption, reforming, moving forward, making itself worthy and able to stand up to the Russian threat, which is not just military. But if those two things happen, those will be major victories for the West against Putin, and major signs of our ability to carry out a strategy. But it's not only in Europe. I don't think there's really a viable U.S. U.S. strategy in the Middle East. I was at a conference yesterday with the Air Force. We raised the question of Jerusalem. Much as I'm happy that Jerusalem is now the capital, if you are trying to build an alliance with Israel and the Sunni states against Iran, and the quid pro quo is that there's progress on Israel and Palestine, then you've done something that ends the progress. Now, maybe there was no progress and there may never be progress. I don't know. But this is certainly going to create problems in the Middle East. Those problems are going to be exploited by Russia. So if you want to create this situation that the President described yesterday, you have to have an antidote. You have to have some sort of strategy to counter the Russian threat, which is not just Syria, but the entire Middle East as a whole. Bases in Egypt. They want bases in Sudan. They want bases in Libya. They've got bases in Syria. They have access to bases in Iran. They want bases in Yemen. If this all goes through, and there's no reason to suspect it won't, because Russian diplomacy is extremely active, and it goes along with arms sales and energy deals, then we're going to be back to a situation like we had 40 years ago when they had a naval base in Alexandria, and bases in Syria, and a base at Socotra on the Gulf, which commands the Red Sea, so that they will be able to have their finger on the pulse of the Red Sea, Suez Canal, Eastern and Central Mediterranean, and even project power into the Persian Gulf. Any energy planner can tell you right away what that means. It means higher prices, greater threats to energy, and Russia will have to be taken seriously, and Middle Eastern states will have to play ball with Russia, even beyond the extent that they are now. So the European strategy also depends on a Middle Eastern one. With regard to Turkey, which is now playing games with Russia, I don't know what the strategy is. I guess we just have to wait out Erdogan, because he seems to be in total charge of the situation, but also totally irrational. And he has set Turkey back. As others know, Turkey was regarded about 10, 15 years ago as one of the coming economies. Now, nobody even talks about it. Erdogan did this by himself, It's an astonishing achievement. Finally, we have to retaliate against the arms control treaty violations. Every arms control treaty that we have signed with the Russians, except the New START treaty, has been violated. And at the rate of Russian nuclear procurement, they will reach the numbers of the New START treaty in about 6 months. At which time they will either have to destroy a whole series of nuclear weapons or simply keep going and be in violation of that treaty. And the astonishing thing is, to me, that despite the fact that the CFE treaty, the INF treaty, this weapons on seabeds treaty has been broken, the Open Skies, the Vienna Note, and all these others, there's been no retaliation. There's been impunity. And as a matter of fact, you have people in Europe, like the German foreign minister, who are trying to restore conventional arms talks with the Russians, in spite of the fact that every treaty we have signed has been violated. I happened to be in Berlin at a conference he organized in September, and I got up and said this, and I'm sure that I did not endear myself to the German Foreign Office, but that's fine. They're not my friends either. The fact of the matter is that if you want arms control and believe in arms control, that's fine. But arms control to work, as Ronald Reagan said, takes two to tango. It has to be mutually verifiable, credible agreements. And if they are broken, we're not going to play. And if anything, we would therefore have to have a discussion in NATO, and this is my final point, as to the role that nuclear weapons play in the defense of Europe. That discussion has to be led by the United States. I don't prejudge the outcome. I don't know specifically what role nuclear weapons play in the defense of Europe. That's not for me to decide. There's 28 states in NATO. They will decide according to their best understanding of their interests. But that discussion needs to take place because what we are dealing with is a state that is prepared at the drop of a hat to threaten nuclear weapons and has made clear that it will use nuclear weapons first if it thinks its vital interests are at stake in a conflict in Europe. Without going into the theology of deterrence and all the details, that's the Russian position. And that confirms what we have just said here. One, Russia is at war with the United States and the West. And two, to be honest, it's a gangster state. And as the French say, à la guerre, comme à la guerre.
I, for one, will sleep worse tonight than I did last night. Thank you, gentlemen. So I'm not quite sure I understand, and Steve, you suggested we have to understand how they think, not project what the Russians are thinking and how they define winning. When I was growing up, it was pretty simple. They wanted to bury us, and were pretty blatant about it, and it was territorial and military, and they had the capability, and we countered that with mutually assured destruction, and somehow got through all that, even though I was in Miami during the Cuban Missile Crisis when I was growing up, and our relatives up north thought destruction was imminent. My brother and I went out to play football, which may be the appropriate reaction sometimes. So the question, I guess, is how do they define winning? Is it that they want to steal from the rest of the Russians and from us and amass personal fortunes, or do they want to bury us and take over the world, or some other alternative? Steve, why don't you take the first shot at that?
Okay. Winning means both in terms of the theft and staying in power and in geopolitical interest, that the game goes on without any fundamental change. They have no solutions to any international crisis whatsoever. Not even their so-called double freeze for Korea. What they really want, first of all, is domestically at home, as Anders and Paul have said, is to be able to keep this regime in power ad infinitum with Western help, loans, technology transfer, business deals, and liberal banking regulations that let them in, and so on. That means a reduction in tensions, but they can only get that by trying to intimidate people into doing so. So they want that, and they want their power unchecked and unchanged. And in foreign affairs, what they want is, to some degree, a replica of this situation. As an unconstrained autocracy at home, they want to be able to be an unconstrained autocracy abroad. Now, what does that mean? For Russians, autocracy and empire, or what they call держава, great power status, are the two sides of the same coin. The one cannot exist with the other. They do not regard any of the states that are currently in Europe today, except maybe Germany, as truly sovereign or independent states. Neither the former Warsaw Pact states nor the former members of the Soviet Union are either territorially integral or really sovereign in the Russian view, whatever the legal papers may say. De jure is one thing, de facto is another. We do business with them on the basis of expediency. We have no choice, but in reserve, it's all contingent. It depends on circumstances. So they want to be able, I wouldn't say so much as territorial expansion, but as expansion of Russian control and power over neighboring states. And then once they have that, as Catherine the Great said, I can't defend my empire, my borders, unless I expand them. Then Poland and all the other states will come in as well. So they're launching all these subversion campaigns all over Europe, from Finland all the way to Turkey and into the Middle East. Second, what they want is that we recognize their right to behave this way, and essentially we get back to a status that they had in the Cold War. The best expression of this was Andrei Gromyko at the 24th Party Congress in 1971. There is no question in international politics today that can be resolved without the participation of the Soviet Union. But they don't really want to resolve it. They want to make sure that they're participants at the table and prolong it, because frozen conflicts, dissent, fractures in the alliance and so forth are important to them. They want to break the transatlantic alliance and hollow out European security institutions, NATO and the European Union, because the greatest geopolitical threat to them is democracy, particularly as it comes in the form of an integrated Europe. Integrated Europe under the Kaiser or under Hitler or under Napoleon are one thing. Integrated Europe under the European Union is quite a different story.
That's why you just add another way of saying.
Push your button.
There is great, Steve is absolutely right that their main threat is the United States, because we represent a force that can challenge their legitimacy. We can challenge them on criminality and their behavior internationally. But they are at war with us, and they realize one thing: they cannot conquer us militarily. They cannot conquer the West. They cannot engage in a winning war there. What they have concluded with their information warfare doctrine is that they can only win with the acquiescence of the West. That is why information warfare based on subversion is the key to their strategy in terms of how they could possibly win. Okay? And this is when you understand principles like, I will quote Gerasimov's statement in 2013 in the Military Industrial Courier. He said in his value of prediction that he understands that the line between war and peace have become blurred, and that the importance of non-military means have become paramount to striking an enemy across his entire strategic, political, military, societal, economic space. He emphasized that non-military means of achieving military and strategic goals has grown and in many cases exceeded the power of weapons in their effectiveness. So their doctrine is now very much formed. They went from, they have formalized a military doctrine based on these principles of information warfare understood in the broadest understanding. We do not have this concept, as Steve pointed out. They understand information warfare as the entire spectrum of conflict, from white, black propaganda to disinformation to Maskarovka, all the way, the whole notion of using trolls and other mechanisms, all the way through assassination, terrorism, and unconventional warfare, and from a military standpoint, electronic warfare. And that is one area where they militarily are superior to us right now. They started investing. They learned after the first Gulf War that they could not compete against our net-centric warfare capabilities of fighting the way we fought there. So what they started doing back in Yeltsin's time is investing in denying our ability to engage in net-centric warfare, namely, to be able to take down our communications, satellite communications, etc., to be able to jam our radars, to be able to jam our systems. All of this is on display right now in the Ukraine. All of it. This equipment is hair-raisingly scary to the United States military because we were so distracted since 9/11 that our whole signal corps came down to electronic warfare in the U.S. Army of 143 men. Everyone else in the signal corps was directed at countering IEDs. And now we're trying to catch up. But that is one area where they do have some war-winning capability to blind us so that we cannot communicate. Anyways, I think that, as Enders pointed out, another strategic, very important, is the money laundering that goes on. And I just want to add one thing to his brilliant analysis, is that why invest in real estate? Because what you do is you put cash down, you get a property, and when you need money, what do? You take a loan out. That's how the Colombians do it. That's how all the organized crime, they will go to Phoenix and they'll buy hundreds of homes for cash. And then they, each week, what they do, they take out a loan, and each week they come and they make a cash payment at the bank. So what you're doing is you're getting money back, and then you're laundering new money through the system. Now, let's just say someone received a very large loan from Deutsche Bank. Let's just say, maybe 650 million. Now, if you can't pay that, I don't know, but if you can't pay that back, and then Deutsche Bank takes you to court, and you get, in Deutsche Bank, it's countersued $2 billion, and all of a sudden, the court case gets dropped, and you're given another 650 million. Did someone pick up that note? Did someone pay back that loan? So, again, Anders, follow the money, because that's where you see power, political influence. This is where you see real recruitment.
Anders, you're going to follow Paul.
Yeah, I just want to add a few aspects here. What Steve started off with here, I think is central. There are two objectives. First, stay in power, and second, weaken the West. These are the central objectives, and then you have their variations of it. So staying in power, The Russian Imperial Minister of Interior, Vyacheslav von Klever, stated in 1904, what we need is a small victorious war. That's how the Russia-Japanese War started. And it did not become neither victorious nor small. But this myth is being expressed in public in Russia ever so often. So how should we look upon Putin? A small victorious war in Chechnya in 1999, a small victorious war against one oligarch in 2003, a small victorious war in Georgia in 2008, and then the next in Crimea in 2014. So this is very much Putin's political wherewithal. And in order to rule, you need bread and circus, according to Nero. And if you don't have so much bread, you deliver more circus, which today, for Putin, is war. So this is how we should look upon it, which is very much in line with my colleagues. And then weaken the West. I think it's very important that we understand that destabilization is good in itself. And of course, a major threat to Putin is the European Union, because it holds Europe together. So it's not surprising that Russia engaged very strongly on the side of a Brexit. And with regard to financing, the Remain people emphasized that it was 6 hedge funders who financed most of the Brexit campaign. Hedge funders don't like stable currencies. They make money on swinging currencies, but perhaps there was something else also. So we have to think of it that Putin is very good at bribing people. There are a number of top politicians in Europe who are perceived to have been bribed by Putin. We should be very careful whenever we see any political leader who meets Putin one-on-one, because that is a strong indication that that person might be bribed. So, of course, I can't mention any name, because that would be libelous. But this is a very important element. Another is that Putin feels an authoritarian solidarity. He complained loudly about the killing of Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein. You know, these were nice people. They know how to kill their own citizens. How can they be taken out? This is Putin's outlook, not to mention Yanukovych. So he whines publicly about how various dictators have been killed or taken out of action and things like that. This is wrong. So we should think quite imaginatively about how bad he can be. On the positive side, I would give, I don't think that he's neo-imperialist. He wants to have this instability rather than a bigger Russia. He wants to have these zones of instability around him. And he does not want to restore the Soviet Union. There's no real ideology there. At the same time as he pushes some nationalist theme, he goes to Israel or to Netanyahu and praises various Israeli issues. He participated in the inauguration of a monument against the Great Terror in 1937. So he's simply a skillful, opportunistic, you may say cynical politician, but there's no ideology there, there's no party, and so far there's no family dynasty, which is a danger that I'm a bit afraid of. And also he respects the economic constraints. He doesn't start a big war. He knows that he can't afford it. He's not irrational. When he started bombing Syria, what did he do? He went to Obama at the UN General Assembly and discussed Syria on the 27th of September 2015. And Obama gave him a big lecture about how Putin lived in the 19th century and Obama lived in the 21st century. And Putin essentially said, thank you, that was all of what I wanted to know. By this you said that you are not going to lift a finger, so now I can start bombing Syria, which he did 3 days later. So I think we should appreciate the rationality in this. And also, Russia's military expenditures now, properly accounted, of 5.3% of GDP. It's not much. The US under Reagan spent an average of 6% of GDP in military expenditure. And in spite of what Steve said here, Russia's expenditure will not go beyond that. So there is some relief. Thank you.
So, gentlemen, one last question and then we'll open it up. We read about Russia has an aging population, deteriorating health, an economy that's stagnant, that's based really only on the price of oil. There was a burst of anti-corruption protests last year. It may have petered out, it may still be going on. Is there a chance that Russia will implode from within, that these will take their toll in a way that changes Russia's behavior? Or is there also a change, if that starts to happen, that it causes the powers that are there to lash out and be even more aggressive outside, as you say, for the circus aspect of maintaining control?
Well, if you look at Russian history, for implosion to occur, there have to be certain conditions, one of which is a protracted war that they lose. That hasn't happened yet. Economic hardship in and of itself is not going to lead to revolution in Russia. The Russians can put up with a lot of economic hardship, as we all know. Well, but I do believe that, while I don't think anything's going to change as long as Putin's in power, I think the next man who comes in, because he's going to have to, assuming he comes in not through violent means, but through elite acceptance, some sort of elite consensus that so-and-so ought to be the boss after Putin goes, is going to realize that for him to be number one, and not for the oligarchs to be number one, and second, for Russia to be able to maintain any of this great power pretense that it has, he has to make reforms. And he's going to run into the problem of what I call the dilemma of the reforming czar. Czars very often tried to launch reforms and then backed away when they realized just how close they were coming to the third rail. Gorbachev, who did not have a sense of danger, kept going, and you see the results. But the system as such is fundamentally unstable and uncompetitive, and it is already losing great power capability. If you look really closely, I think, at this, for example, the Russo-Chinese relationship, which is a subject in and of its own right.
It's the next panel.
Right, it's our next panel. Increasingly, Russia is only able to do what it's doing in the world because China is supporting it economically and politically. That means increasingly it's becoming a great power on Chinese sufferance. Now, that's an unpleasant thing for Russians to hear, but I think it's beginning to happen. The longer this goes on, and the longer they are isolated in the West, the more this will happen because they have nobody else to turn to. So I think that the next leader, whoever it may be and whenever he comes in, may try to make reforms. And if he does, then there will be an upheaval.
You know, about the demographic issues, I wrote a piece back in 2002 talking about predicting the demographic meltdown of Russia from 150 million people in 50 years to 100 million. Now, they've done some progress on that. But, you know, we've been hearing for decades, really, about Russia's collapse, its demise. As one Russian general once told me, your military thinks of comfort, we think of suffering. There's a different dimension here. I don't expect anything to lead, and even if demise occurs, lashing out at their weakest moment is really not a well thought out idea. There's nothing to benefit on that area. I think that to the point about where we stand with Russia, they want, just like everything else, they want to maintain a status quo because Putin realizes that if he's out of power, he's either dead or arrested. and his whole crew is. So they must maintain. And they're not going to push things to an extremist point that could threaten their ability to maintain their money and power for their own protection.
Anders.
Yeah, I'm surprised here. I have actually a slightly different view than my friend Steve here. I think that an implosion is quite likely. And I think that we should look for something like August 1911, when the top of the FSB says you Putin are really not quite accurate. We have to have somebody who's more useful. So when can it happen? War, and I don't think that it needs to be a protracted one. Jumping back to 1905, it was a rather short war, but it was quite disastrous. I think that Putin is playing with two big risks in his war policy, and this could backfire. I think that Russia is really modernized, so that social unrest could be serious. We are now seeing Alexei Navalny, who's the only other politician in Russia today, apart from Putin. But he is traveling around the country, and every second day he has a political mass meeting directed against corruption and Putin in one industrial town after the other, where people thought that there could never be any political activity. So he's traveling around himself in 100 cities. On the 12th of June, he organized demonstrations in 200 cities around Russia. He goes for the young people, and he focuses on one issue, corruption. And you wonder, why is he allowed to go on? Well, because the big danger, as the Kremlin sees it, is that there will be too much passivity, that not the majority of the population will come out and vote at all on the 18th of March. The current poll numbers are that about 55% will vote, and 55% of them for Putin. What the Kremlin wants is 70-70. And that requires that you allow some activity. And this is given, I was in Moscow 2 months ago, and I went to Navalny's headquarters. He was arrested that day, so I couldn't talk to him, but I talked to one of his deputies, who was arrested the next day instead. But these people are going on, and it was quite interesting to see the headquarters. It's 40 youngsters, most of them 20-25, sitting in a nondescript office building. You wonder, how can you let an office to Navalny? Well, because the owner happens to be a Cypriot citizen, so he can then fall back on international contract. So I think that we should take that serious, and then in the end, how it always ends, October 64 with Khrushchev, August 91 with Gorbachev, is in the Politburo. The Politburo today is called the Security Council. Half of the members are steady generals who are looking upon Putin as their contemporary and are talking to him by first name and not otherwise. Generally, when I was in Moscow now, I go there about twice a year. I had the feeling that this was like 1984 when I arrived to work in Moscow for 3 years. But people were tired of being afraid, and therefore started talking privately. But for the last 5 years, since 2012, I felt that it's tightening up, that even in private conversations people say less and less. And then all of a sudden we started talking. And that I thought was a very good sign. 1984 was admittedly 7 years to 91. I don't think that one should make any prediction about time. But what I don't agree with, Steve, is that there won't be another ruler, and there won't be reform under the second ruler. This system can't be reformed. I think that Paul thinks as me that it's simply too criminalized, and also that the wealth is too centralized for it to reform. So I think if I try to reform it, it will just collapse, as happened with Gorbachev, but I don't think that we will see another Gorbachev. I think that the change will come in another way.
Let me be more precise. I don't think the system can be reformed either. I think that the next guy is going to come in, and I think it's going to be a man, who will realize that either we continue this system and it just has its entropy, because, or we have to make changes. And the minute he tries to make changes, then we'll have an upheaval of sorts. And that's always been the case in Russian history. So I really don't disagree that much with Anders and Paul about things. I think the effort may be made, but I don't think it's going to be successful because, again, like the Soviet system, the system cannot be reformed. It either stands or falls integrally. And I agree, it's far too criminalized, far too corrupt, and cannot provide economic growth and social well-being to too many people, and ultimately will fail of its own accord.
So we promised a 1:30. We've got time for one question. I apologize. It's been fascinating. Make it a good one.
I can stay.
I'm going to violate the rule.
And some of the folks here have said they can
A
stay.
question for Anders. You talked about money laundering through law firms here in the United States. I'd be very interested to hear some more detail on that. And for Paul and for Steve, just very quickly, what is Russia's game in Syria and with Iran? What are they up to?
I can't
And what
do
is
it
their
quickly.
strategy?
I'll stay afterwards for you. Can't do it quickly.
On the money laundering through law firms, attorney-client privilege covers money. And this is completely unacceptable. This should simply be prohibited by a law of Congress, or perhaps it's only a regulation from Treasury that can stop it. One stark example is, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was about $1 billion. That was laundered through Sherman Sterling in the Malaysian sovereign wealth fund looting. And this Wall Street Journal wrote it up at the end of last year. I think it was 26th of December last year, as you can see all the details there. And when I've asked people from law firms or specialists about this, they say that this must be done by best practices. And I'm a member of an anti-corruption action group here in Washington, and one of the members had contacted 13 different law firms to check if they could take money. We're clearly making sure that it was corrupt money. And 12 out of 13 law firms said yes. So this is quite an accepted practice. The keys for these practices in real estate and also for the law firms is New York and Miami and Palm Beach.
And thank you on that note, as a Miamian and a lifetime Miamian. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to the Jewish Policy Center. Thank you to Shoshana for putting this on. And thank you all for coming.